Good morning. Thank you for being here with us this time in the morning and for coming to this presentation, this discussion, which I think is going to be very interesting. The title itself gives us a clue: Models of Public-Private Collaboration in Affordable Housing and the Management of Residential Portfolios. These two issues could seem very different, but little by little we will realize that there's a big relationship between both things. You already know the people who are here with us. Some of them are very well known by all of you. You will know from them about the level of the conversation. Joan Clos, ex-mayor of Barcelona, who's also the person who's related to the world of housing, Executive Director of UN Habitat, the United Nations. We are also here with Dr. Kurt Puttingham, who's Senior Advisor of the Office of the Executive City Councillor for Housing. We're going to speak about Vienna, talking about social housing. Vienna is a benchmark. Gonzalo Bernardo, who's a professor at the University of Barcelona. He's an economist and he's a professor of economy, and he's also the director of the Master in Assessment for Real Estate Development of the University of Barcelona. We also have here David Vila, who is the vice president of Renta Corporación, and before this we also have Daniel José Toribio, who's a commercial director of renting, expansion and development. Vienna is an example we should follow when we talk about social housing. Mr. Kloos said Vienna is a clear example of social housing. When you see how many people are living in social housing in Vienna and the level we have here, we see that there's a lot of work ahead. Yes, it's social housing, and also housing which is not necessarily housing with protected prices, but it's owned by the local administration. We have another example which is similar in quantitative terms, which is the example of Singapore. When we talk about open economies, free economies, I think Professor Kurt Puttinger will tell us in greater detail about this. We'll learn about the model of Vienna. We have the initiative from the City Council that we want people not to spend more than 10% of their wages in the house. Mr. Puttinger, could you tell us a bit what the model of Vienna is about? Muchas gracias. Buenos días. Creo que voy a dar primero una breve imagen general de las normativas, regulaciones generales, y luego voy a entrar en las cuestiones específicas de cómo organizamos la participación de las empresas privadas en nuestro modelo o en nuestro sistema de viviendas subsidiada. La situación en Viena, ahora llevamos como unos 100 años practicando esto y tenemos en nuestra Constitución un párrafo especial que indica que es la obligación del Estado preocuparse de la vivienda de las personas. Por eso hay una ligera diferencia con la ley europea, porque en 1912 la ley sobre la competitividad se concentraba en este aspecto de la vivienda. En Europa ese aspecto de la vivienda se redujo a una parte de la población muy reducida. Viena tiene una posición consolidada en este caso y no somos los únicos en Europa que tienen la misma posición. Basado en este párrafo de la Constitución, se construyó un marco general a nivel nacional que regula la vivienda financiada por el Estado. En la Primera República produjimos 35.000 apartamentos, propiedad de la ciudad de Viena directamente, y después de la Segunda Guerra Mundial empezamos otra vez y construimos vivienda social, y ahora tenemos aproximadamente 1 millón de unidades en Viena y 250.000 apartamentos propiedad directa de la ciudad de Viena, y luego 240.000 que salen del sector subvencionado. Entonces, una gran proporción de la vivienda forma parte de este mundo subvencionado, y el 65% de la población de Viena vive en estos pisos. ¿Cuáles son los principales instrumentos para aplicar estos procedimientos? A veces se le llama un modelo. Cuando era director de planificación de la ciudad de Viena, siempre decía que el desarrollo urbano es el trabajo más sencillo que puedes tener. Si tienes dinero y tierra, el dinero no es un problema. Hay mucho dinero en el mundo, pero la tierra, los terrenos son un problema. Y hace 35 años decidimos implementar un fondo especial propiedad de la ciudad de Viena. Se llama el Fondo de la Vivienda, y la obligación, el objetivo de este fondo es conseguir terrenos para vivienda subvencionada y hacer que estos terrenos se utilicen para la construcción de esta vivienda. Empezamos llevando los terrenos propiedad de la ciudad de Viena, los pusimos en este fondo, y estos terrenos funcionan desde hace 35 años y no hace falta ninguna subvención para esta tierra, simplemente se financia con compraventa. La base financiera para subvencionar apartamentos viene de un impuesto nacional, el 1% de 1% de los sueldos, 0,5% de los empleadores, 0,5% lo pagan los empleados, se invierte en la vivienda subvencionada. A partir de este texto, este impuesto que se recoge a nivel nacional y se distribuye a las provincias, somos Viena, una de las nuevas provincias de nuestro sistema federal. Adicionalmente, tenemos la amortización de los últimos 40 años. Tenemos unos 470.000 millones, 470 millones de euros para subvencionar la vivienda. Y nosotros invertimos el 52% de este dinero en nuevos proyectos y alrededor del algo más del 30% en renovaciones, y una pequeña cantidad es para individuos para cualquier necesidad que surja. Según la reglamentación europea, no podemos vender los bloques de apartamentos como hacíamos hace 40 años, así que tenemos que seguir las reglas y organizamos licitaciones públicas. Ahora mismo creo que cada año tenemos entre 5 y 6, puede que hasta 10 licitaciones, y las empresas pueden presentarse tanto para los terrenos como para las subvenciones. Hay normas para la toma de decisiones, hay un control de la calidad de los proyectos, y las empresas vienen a este fondo con un proyecto y un desglose financiero, las características de la construcción, que son elementos muy importantes. Son muy importantes las condiciones que tendrá el usuario final. Tiene que especificarse también el precio del alquiler por metro, etcétera. Esto tienen que garantizarlo, y en base a esta información el jurado toma una decisión. Luego vendemos el suelo, el terreno, a la empresa que es propietaria del terreno durante los próximos 100 años, y les damos derecho de construir solamente durante 84 años y ahora mantenemos la propiedad del terreno. Esto tiene ciertos efectos positivos, porque nuestro primer gobierno conservador cambió la norma en la dirección de que la vivienda subvencionada podía transformarse en vivienda de propiedad privada después de 10 años. El último gobierno conservador redujo esto a un plazo de 5 años, lo cual quiere decir que muchos apartamentos podían salir del mercado de alquiler, lo cual es muy negativo. Si les damos únicamente el derecho a construir en el marco legal de Austria, esto no es posible. El apartamento subvencionado tiene que quedarse en el mundo de la vivienda residencial de alquiler. Los límites y las condiciones están así claramente establecidos. Por lo tanto, si solicitas un apartamento comunitario, no tienes que pagar ningún depósito, y el alquiler es de alrededor de 7,50 € por metro cuadrado en general, con ligeras variaciones, y la mejor oferta que tenemos ahora en el sector subvencionado es un depósito de 60 € por metro cuadrado, y disculpen, no puedo apagarlo por la traducción al inglés. La mejor oferta del mundo subvencionado son 60 € por metro cuadrado de depósito y 7,50 € por metro cuadrado de alquiler. y las posibilidades de solicitar este tipo de apartamento también están reglamentadas y los límites los define principalmente los ingresos de la persona que alquila. Los parámetros se centran en la situación social y cosas parecidas, pero el principal límite son los ingresos netos. Una persona alrededor de 46.000 euros por año de ingresos después de impuestos. Se trata, por lo tanto, de una vivienda subvencionada para la clase media, porque una pareja joven con formación académica, con un buen empleo. We should finish. Lo siento muchísimo. Ahora no puedo entender por qué he apagado el teléfono. Tenemos que ir acabando esta primera presentación. Un minuto. Una pareja joven universitaria con un buen empleo pueden optar a un apartamento de estas características, y a menudo lo que pasa es que después de 10 años son ricos y tienen que irse de este apartamento. No, la pregunta es, ¿tienen que irse del apartamento? No, no tienen por qué abandonarlo. As you Muchas gracias. You have realized we have our mobile phones because we have a new system, a translation system, which is very interesting. Mr. Klaus, we have heard what this system of Vienna is about. So Mr. Puttinger said if you have money, half of the problem is solved, but we need the space, the land. Barcelona is a good example of a place that also needs land, space. Well, I think from the lessons we can learn from Vienna, when there are a few lessons we can learn from Vienna. First of all, having a market with the kind of quite an important presence of housing, subsidized housing is a long-term policy. It's not something that can be improvised by building 20 units here, saying that next year we will build 130. We're talking about... I'm talking slowly so that Mr. Kurt can hear the translation properly. Reality is built in the long term. The total of around 1 million housing units, social housing units in Vienna, half of them are subsidized housing, and of this 450,000, half of them are owned by the city council, and the other half is built by public companies with no, which are not non-profit companies or public entities that are a part of the program. There is an important participation of the private sector in the subsidized housing system in Vienna. What are the characteristics? He talked about money and land. In order to build housing, you need funds and land. Land, it depends on urban planning. Urban planning should provide or guarantee that there will be land available for this type of programs. And money, in the case of Austria, this is guaranteed by means of a tax, 1% tax on the wages, which half of it is 0.5 is paid by the employer and 0.5 is paid by the worker, and this fund, which has a profit of 500,000, around 500 million euros per year profit. 55% of it is devoted to new projects, new developments, and 48% of it is devoted to refurbishment of the existing stock. As they have been working this way for 100 years, there are some buildings that need to be refurbished. This problem is the same. They have the same situation in Singapore, and in the conversations I've had with the City Council of Singapore, they have the same system in order to guarantee that there are funds for housing, the funds for affordable housing, and not the result of a 5-year plan or a policy that the government or another government decided. These are guaranteed by tax, which is established in the Constitution. Therefore, the political parties cannot change this easily. Let's not forget about 5-year plans for housing. Think of a system that produces 500 million euros per year for Austria's public housing. Austria is a federal government. Like Spain, it has autonomous regions. It has 9 autonomous regions, and Vienna is both a municipality and a region. We should understand that in the case of Vienna, the whole housing system is based on the capacity of Vienna as a region, not as a municipality. Vienna is a federal state, and therefore it adds the municipal competencies with the regional ones, and as it has this double regulatory capacity, that is why it has the capacity to intervene in the housing market. About the funds, we also should take into account that 2/3, more or less, if I understood it right, well, numbers are not that important. 2/3 are devoted to new developments, and 1/3 is devoted to assisting the poorest people who do not have access to this type of housing because of their price. Something else that's also important, which is a target both in Vienna and also in Singapore, is that they don't want to build neighborhoods with a concentration of poor people. We don't want to concentrate, we do not want to create poor neighborhoods, because this creates a vicious circle, and they become worse with time. If you live in a poor people's neighborhood, if you become richer, you leave the neighborhood, and the problem is that the neighborhoods that are stigmatized as poor people's neighborhoods, their future is usually quite bleak. That is why both in Singapore and in Vienna they are very careful about this, and they want to mix people. They want to have mixed neighborhoods with a bit of everything everywhere, so that neighborhoods are not stigmatized as neighborhoods that are such as Ciutat Meridiana or Torrebro, which are neighborhoods that only have poor people. So middle class people do not live in these neighborhoods because they don't like the population. This reduces the land stock that can be used for new housing. Talking about prices, You've already seen this. The price that they are charging for these subsidized apartments is 7 euros per square meters. This is a piece of advice, 7 euros per square meter. So who has access to these prices? Well, from the top limit of the rent, if you earn more than 50,000 euros per year, you cannot access this housing. I think it is about 48,000 euros. If you earn less than 50,000 euros, you can access this housing. There is a waiting list, and there are some criteria to go up, move up or down in this waiting list. So, for example, if you have 3 children, you move up in the list. If you are only a couple, with childless couple, you move down in the waiting list. And the percentage of housing in the market which is not subsidized is around 10% of the housing stock in Vienna, and the prices of this private housing in Vienna are more expensive than the private housing in Barcelona. There is 10% of the housing which has prices comparable to London, Paris, and the other big modern cities. But what's important is that as this public-private sector has such a great control on the 84% of the housing. 84% of the housing in Vienna is for rent. What else could I tell you that could be useful for us? I don't know. Maybe you could ask questions. Maybe we could have a first round, and I would like to hear what the 3 people who are with us think about this. When Mr. Klaus was talking about what made people move up or down in the waiting list, Gonzalo Bernardo smiled when he talked about this. Why did you smile, Gonzalo? I would answer at the end because I want to explain what I want to say. This is as simple as this. In Vienna, in Austria, they devote they have some public income which is around 50% of the GDP. If we move that to Spain, that's 120,000 million more. That would mean increasing our taxes from some GDP income of 38.9 to more than 50. If a politician offers this tax increase, he will only be voted by his family, by nobody else. So you have to bear in mind what a politician tells you when he has to manage public housing stock. That's like being in the purgatory. If they wanted to send me to hell, they would send me to something quite similar to this, because the first thing they tell you is, I had to be here for 5 years. No, I'll have to stay longer than 5 years. Because if you dare kick me out, I will ruin your political life. No, please stay. Secondly, let's renew the housing in the private sector every 20, 30 years. No, forget about that. Some people get rid of the window frames, others destroy the flat, and don't complain about this because you will be in trouble. In Spain, politicians are not stupid, and they think, no, am I going to make my life hell? No, I'm going to simplify my life. If I am really, really brave with a part of the public land, I'm going to build some public housing and will sell them. I don't like this because that means that we are all subsidizing these people, and the professor has defined some some selection criteria of who can access the market. I know quite a lot of freelancers who earn a lot of money, and they have access. They access the social protection house because they said that the wages did not reach the minimum. In Spain, the minimum wage is 23,000 euros, and miraculously, freelancers only earn around 11,000. If you believe this, is because you believe that children come from parents. I believe in the Frankenstein economist who gets a measure from Vienna, one from Sweden, one from the United States, and tries to implement it in Spain. No, but in Spain is different. In this country, you cannot raise taxes very much. We have a public education where you spend 3.9% in GDP, less than Guinea, for example. We have public health that is going to be spending 11% of less than what's recommended by the World Health Organization, and the pensions are in danger. And are we going to spend more money into public housing? No, we're not going to do that. I believe that the public sector can do this really well through a public-private partnership. The model is very easy. It's not a Frankenstein economy. It's something completely new. I have never seen this model anywhere else. The idea is very simple. The public sector offers the land. The private sector will build the houses and will be the owner of the houses. It could be for 50 years, for 100 years, certain amount of years that can be negotiated. Public sector regulates. Therefore, the rents are defined by the public sector. However, the public sector, the city council, has to guarantee the owner of these houses, that can be a private developer or an investment fund, 5% of profitability, because if this is guaranteed, the private developer will earn a lot of money and will look after this public housing. Why? Because they will get this rent that are guaranteed by the public sector. I will make them bonds, I will put them in the market with the guarantee of the public sector, and this way in the market, these bonds in the present situation, I can place them more or less with a 1.5 interest rate, and the price of the bond works this way. When the interest rates go down, the price of the bond goes up. For this private developer, this means that if I am guaranteed 5% and I can put this in the market at the price of 1.5, the bond price has gone up, and me as a private developer, I earn more by putting this rent in the bond market than for doing my work as a developer. It wouldn't be as in Spain, that when you have some land to build public rental housing, the developers are not interested. No, if we make it a financial business with such low interest rates, it would be amazing business. I was laughing because the first thing a father does in Stockholm when he is born, he inscribes him in a social housing list, so that maybe when he's 18 years old, he will get a house, because the lists are incredibly long. People are not stupid. Social protection housing, where do I want to live? Well, I live in Barcelona, don't take me to Mollet, because Mollet is like far west for me. I want to live in Barcelona, and if possible, it would be nice if I could live close to my parents, because I was born in Poble Sec, and I have the right, I don't know where this right comes from, I have the right to continue living in Poble Sec. Well, I'm sorry, you don't have this right. I think that what Colau is doing in Barcelona is an absolute disaster. She couldn't even make the 400 social housing that the socialists made. Most of you will know this. There are some services that do the following. When it's difficult to sell a house or a group of houses, they make up somebody who's interested, who bids for it, and this bidding is quite high, and the city council, well, the services does an amazing business because the city council of Ada Colau has been tricked by this.
It's a real disaster. If we have to do a lot of social housing for rental, which I think is fine, but with the collaboration of the private sector, and if anybody has to be evicted, then they should be evicted. In this country, we have to respect private property according to the Constitution, and nowadays you may think that those who rent and sell wouldn't dare to announce that it's on sale because the next day it will be occupied, and the mayoress is delighted to protect the squatters instead of private property. Well, I think instead of Barcelona has 100 kilometers, Madrid has 606 and that's if we talk about the metropolitan area, and where we need social housing, protected housing, is in towns or areas where there is a lot of land. And instead of selling it to the private sector or not doing anything, some people want to keep it as countryside because they like that. But if we talk about the land in Barcelona, if we sell them to the private developer, that developer, with the money they receive, they could buy more land in the metropolitan area or the region in order to increase social housing. But this is for a very long period, not 5 or 10 years. It's very difficult to achieve miracles in housing. I thought you were going to keep that simpler. We have 90 minutes to talk about the different subjects and to react to each one, and we've only got 17 minutes left. I would like to still hear from Mr. Vila or Mr. Toribio to understand the concepts that you feel are important. Yesterday, talking with Mr. Vila, he said it's the professionalization of the rental sector is very important, for example. So I would invite whoever is going to speak now, not just to react to what has been said, but to talk about what is necessary. Professionalization of housing is linked to the solution of the problem regarding access to housing. We're constantly talking about PPP models. We all agree with the professor. It's clear that when we look for a PPP model, we have to understand both sides. They have their different interests in the development of these measures in order to promote a greater amount of social housing, which is where we feel the problem exists when it comes to rental homes. If we talk about access and we look at the Vienna example, what we have to understand is that the main difference between Vienna and the other European countries compared to Spain, and not just focusing on Madrid and Barcelona, rental sector, in all of Spain there's a problem. We have to bear in mind the percentage of housing which is privately owned or rented. Since 2020 to 2018, we've gone from 17% rental to 23%. With the rental prices have remained stable. We have 2% social housing when in Spain it's 12%. I mean, I'm not going to mention Vienna, which we have seen it has a much higher percentage than that. Housing policies, therefore, have to focus on increasing supply and making it easier to gain access to social housing. During this period, I feel that we have made a mistake in discussing whether the solution to this problem should be regulated by price limits or by increasing supply. And we have forgotten that during this crisis time, an important percentage of the population has been excluded from having access to housing. Rental housing is not just for people who cannot buy a property, but because young people consider it part of their lifestyle, the way they want to use housing. We have to focus on regulating the market. We cannot see constant changes in the law. I think the Vienna example is very interesting because it's in the hands of just one person. Here we have to have the council regulation, the regional government, and then the state regulation. I think that the public bodies should make a big effort to make it easier for young people to find housing and to include the people that have been excluded. We need budget items, and the problem of housing, even though the information services may say this is not, I think we have a big housing problem. I think we have to include more rental assistance programs to help families have access, and we have to provide incentives for housing to be provided. We have 3 million empty units in Spain at the moment. 3 million. Well, that's according to the INE. What they do is they call, make a phone call, they don't pick it up, and that's considered empty. In Barcelona, they talk about 50,000. Ada Colau has done it home by home, and it is actually 10,000. Well, I just share the data provided by the Ministry of Public Works. We could discuss whether it's 2 million or 3 million, but it's still a large number of homes that are not available on the market and which would help in the regulation of properties. I have good news, and I'll explain why. I have a clock here, which, a countdown. We have a countdown. We had 15 minutes a moment ago, and now I'm being told that we have 40 minutes. So we can relax a little bit, and even at the end you'll be able to have some time for the audience to ask questions. Let's hear from the rest. Obviously, I can ask questions. There are many subjects that have been brought up already, but if any of you wants to respond to what's been said so far, just let me know, and we can do that. Mr. Villa, first of all, please. I think that the good thing about, well, the good or the bad aspect of being the last to speak is that a lot has been said already. Within the rental market, well, I could say we're the last to arrive. We think that we form part of the solution, but not part of the problem. Often people want to point at us as part of the problem, but we want to be involved in coming up with a solution. Right now we're very small because we're talking about the rental market. We just represent 5%. It's true that the statistics are quite unreliable and it could be improved, let's say, in this sector. Having said that, I think we coincide in the diagnosis. There is a clear problem when it comes to supply. How can we improve that supply? There are only two alternatives. On the one hand, a greater amount of money in the budget, and on the other hand, the issue of the land. As Gonzalo said, if we talk about the budget, we're obliged to look for public-private partnerships or collaboration. When you want to get married to somebody, the first thing that you want is for them to be somebody you like. If we have a project or an initiative looking to promote rental housing, if we talk about vulture funds, I mean, in all sectors there is good practice and bad practice. I think there are good projects out there. Within this scenario, I think Vienna can provide an example. But right now we're in the third league or in the regional league. We have to move little by little and improve and get better little by little to move up from the bottom division up to the top division. At the end of this story, I'm very sorry, there was a slight technical problem there. We lost the sound for a moment. It's very simple. capital is out there. I don't like to talk about getting rich, but capital, it belongs to savers and pensioners. They use their savings. They're trying to get interest, and that's the money that's out there. And the managers of that money, what they want to do, well, they don't need huge returns. They want stable returns, and housing can provide that. So it's a good solution. And we can see clear alignment. Capital also asks for constant rules. And it's not helpful if we see changes in the law over and over again. We have a central administration, we have regional administration in Spain, and then the local administration. They all regulate different aspects, and capital is always looking for safety and comparisons. I mean, if things get too difficult, too complicated, they will take the money elsewhere. Clearly, what we need, a desire to sit down and build something together. Joanne talked about, or we heard about this 7.5 euros per square metre in the social housing. We're not far from that level, but we have to know how to construct and do this well. I would invite you to look at how we can work constructively, looking for public-private collaboration. I think what we can contribute is professionalisation. It's not the same now if we have a residential building, if we have 100 units and they belong to different owners, or if you have one single owner. Also, we have proposals which look at added value, not just prices, and we need to adapt to cultural change. There are needs out there, but there is also a cultural change. I don't really like to talk about the figures, but I think around by 2030, 60% of the population will be millennials, or 75%, I think, will be millennials. They're not looking to buy a home. They have other priorities due to mobility, all kinds of factors. We need to provide other services, other added value, and this is a proposal that we also want to make. Mr. Klaus can have the floor, then Mr. Bernardos. Mr. Klaus, first of all. Yes, I thought that we were here to talk about public-private collaboration models, and we invited a representative from Vienna to come here to explain their model, not for us to copy it or because it is useful to our country, but to look at the fact that we can do other things, different things in political and social contexts which are different. I did not propose at any time that we should copy the Vienna model here, because I already know that, I'm old enough to know that it cannot be done. This is in order to just to express our thanks to Mr. Kurt Puchinga for coming here and explaining what they do there. If we're not interested in public-private collaboration, but we want to talk about the crisis or the supposed crisis in housing in Spain or in Barcelona, well, then I have some things to say regarding that subject. I would like to know whether we want to focus our debate on looking at public-private collaboration for affordable housing, or whether we're going to be talking about the housing problem, which is very big, with very many interesting issues. We could talk about the bubble from the 1980s. We could talk about many other things. The fall in price, the price recovery, the duality of the market, because, well, why Barcelona and Madrid behave differently to other markets. We could talk about many, many different subjects. I coincide or agree with what has been said by some of the participants, and I mentioned this in my first contribution, trying to help us to understand what Mr. Puchingas said. Affordable housing policy cannot be a short-term policy. This is obvious. I don't think that the market itself will generate affordable housing. I'll say that clearly. Because of supply and demand, I don't think supply and demand will create a situation which would provide affordable housing. We would have to have a debate on affordable housing, which is also a very fertile area. If we're talking in more general terms, perhaps if we want to focus the debate, perhaps we need to discuss whether we have a problem or not. Do we have a problem or not? And if we have a problem, what is the problem? Because it's not clear what's the problem. What there is a lot of noise. We have squatters, we have evictions, we have a financial sector, the savings banks, which have disappeared from our economic reality. Banks are having difficulties. They are increasing the difficulty in getting a mortgage compared to what was done 8 years ago. I think that important things are happening, and it would be worth trying to analyze what's happening and talking about whether we can provide affordable housing in our country and whether the private sector can help with this affordable housing. That's the starting point. Yes, for the round table. First of all, Professor Bernados, and then Mr. Toribio. Good. Well, let's give some context to the behavior of German or Austrian or Spanish citizens. If you think of German, and the word debt and blame is the same in German. So if you're in debt, it's viewed negatively. That situation in Germany, and to a lesser degree in Austria, debt is seen negatively. This means that the population is reluctant to invest in housing. Secondly, one other thing we can observe is that housing, for example in Germany, has been a very bad business between 1980 and 2009. Housing prices dropped by 23% in real terms. This means that, first of all, the bank isn't going to give you 100%. It won't even give you 80%. If you're a big or good customer, you'll get 50%. And if I'm an investor, well, buying an asset whose price has dropped for a long period is a problem. The trends in these countries, in historical terms, well, they've been very different to Spain. First of all, in Spain, a lot of people have acquired assets on the basis of properties acquired in the 50s and 60s and recent years. Even most of you live in Catalonia, and just think of what the large families do. The families that sell their plants, well, when they sell their factories, they set up a real estate company and they live off the rent. It provides them with a lot of money, and then if they want to sell it after a certain period, they'll obtain a much higher price for those properties. In this country, for many years, there is a trend that says what is done abroad is what's good and what we do is bad. And this is something is typical of us, but it's not true. If you think of 2009, Eurostat came up with some statistics about the richest countries in Europe. A comparison of wealth. The Germans got very worked up, thinking they were going to have to rescue the Spaniards, who are richer than us. Yes, in Spain there is more accumulated wealth than in Germany. They invest little in real estate, and in Spain there has been a lot of investment in real estate. Between 1980 and 2007, Spain was the second country in terms of price increases, and many workers, many people without financial expertise, have taken on the criteria of leveraging, because if you have profitability, that increases if you use leverage. So I refuse to believe that millennials or people between 25 and 35 that they're stupid and are going to want to rent, because nowadays if you can buy a home, it's very clearly foolish if you rent. Why am I saying this? Well, let's compare the price of Barcelona rental with what you pay for a mortgage in a town nearby in Barcelona. Maybe 1,200 euros for rent. 1,000, 2,000 euros, I lose them. If I pay more or less for a similar home but in the periphery, in the suburbs, 1,200, I don't lose those 1,200. Why? Well, because the mortgage has two aspects. We have the one side, which is interest. One part is interest, and one part is payment of the capital, which is in installments. So the amount of the money you are returning is the largest part. Maybe out of those 1,200, 200 is paying off interests and 1,000 is paying off the principal. People may say people live on rent accommodation because they have a new paradigm. No, we have structural demand, which didn't exist before. I belong to the generation from the end of the 80s, start of the 90s. Everyone at home with their partner. The couples would live with their parents and save up to buy a house together. But no. What people do now is they spend the money on going out and they rent together. I can tell you that in Barcelona, rental prices will go down, and in Madrid next year, and rental prices will go down because gradually banks will be more generous to younger people. They will give more mortgages to these young people, and we will see that there is an imbalance between supply and demand. Last fact or piece of data, and then I finish. In 2016, 17, 18, approximately 40% of homes have been bought without needing a mortgage, without involving debt. This means that the demand for investment stands at between 35 and 50% of the total. It's outrageous. This means that the increase in supply will be more than demand. And if prices, for example, in Barcelona of 1,000 euros they may not drop down, but the prices that are 2,500, 2,200, 1,800, you either have to reduce that price or you won't rent the property, and that is a trend that will continue over future years. And lastly, if you compare rental prices in Spain at the moment with rental prices in 2007, in Spain as a whole, it's cheaper now. It's true that the starting point for this talk was a different one, but it's true that the people with us have knowledge, their own criteria, and the conversation, well, is heading in the direction that the speakers choose. Mr. Toribio, we wanted to talk about professionalisation of the rental sector, but I completely agree with what Mr. Kloss said. This isn't the debate that we are here to discuss today. We would need more time, but we could talk about whether there is a problem or not. And that needs to be reflected upon. I do not agree with the idea or failing to mention why rentals will be most important in Spain. That this is indeed related to a change in young people's attitudes. 10 years ago, we could have asked how many people rented a vehicle. And today, I'm sure if we ask that same question, many more people rent their vehicle or lease their vehicle. And many brands of clothes are thinking of renting clothes. In the summer of 2019, there was a survey asking about housing. 4 out of 10, it's true it's not a very broad spectrum, but 4 out of 10 people defended the positive aspects of rental, greater freedom, easier access. So I would say that the rental sector will be the protagonist in the future, not just because of this social aspect to provide social housing to people who are at risk of exclusion or to young people, but because I think that this is a cultural change which is here to stay. And if we compare prices in Spain and Europe or in Germany or Austria, we can see that that is what we will see in the future. It's interesting to see how Austria has developed, but we should also bear in mind that Austria is considered one of the cities with the greatest quality of life, far ahead of Madrid or Barcelona. This social housing stock helps to improve the general housing stock. I think we need professionalisation in the rental sector. I firmly believe that the rental sector has to become more professional, otherwise it will fail to exist. When it comes down to it, a rental professional has 2 dogmas which are critical. One is efficiency in property management, which has an impact on the tenants. The owners of the properties invest a lot of money in their properties and in improving them and maintaining them and providing services, more services than the market provides. I would also like to talk about the fact that asset managers have a lot of responsibility in the social area. This is a delicate issue and is very important.
I'm glad you took the topic to this in this direction, because we had 2 issues to discuss this morning. We have this model of social housing, and the second part, which we will devote less time to than what we had thought of at the beginning, but I think it's the time to speak about it. We wanted to speak about the big challenges in the management of housing stock. Mr. David Villa, which are the great challenges we're facing? The big challenges are there. We have all challenges because we have just started. This is a new industry that did not exist in the past. This is the last investment market that has appeared in the Spanish market. We had the investment in office buildings, in logistics, in commercial spaces, and we did not have the residential until very recently. The management of this type of buildings is the most complex one, not so much because of its complexity, but mostly because of the volume of buildings. It's not the same when you have one single rental contract in 100,000 square meters, but if you have 10 houses in these 1,000 meters, you have different tenants, and you have many more problems than if you have just one tenant. So the productive capacity does not exist. We are now creating this capacity. It's not rocket science, really. It is a very technological subject of a technological platform which allows you to make it as efficient as possible, all the management and all the communication with the tenant, because nowadays this is 60% of rental is population between 26 and 40 something. It's people who are used to working with their mobile phones and they do not go to an office to do any administrative requirements. Time is essential, the time of commercial attention and for answers and formalizing, and in order to preserve also the returns of the capital. When that house becomes empty, you have to prepare it for it to come out to the market. Again, you need to know the market. You have to know where the demand is. Have to know about the prices. And there are two fields. You have the technological field and the one of the processes. This is something that must not be forgotten in any sector. The training that these teams need. When there's a problem, you need somebody to solve it. The people who do maintenance become our best salespeople. If you have good maintenance, you will be recommended by your client. Before asking Jean-Claude to speak, I would like to mention a conversation we had with Mr. Villa, and he said something that was quite interesting. He told me about communication, about the importance of improving communication in different aspects. How many people have lost their flats for not paying? How many people have been evicted? There's only been one case of a person who didn't pay for a year and was evicted. So we have to speak about which are the advantages of using professionalization in the sector of rental. Why are we communicating so badly? We're talking now about attracting an audience. Some sensationalist newspapers try to attract an audience, publishing outrageous things. There are some cases there have been some problems, but we need to learn from them and be able to rectify. When we have learned of a situation when the rental price has been revised and there's been a special need, that has to be attended. You cannot create an individual policy case by case. You have to create a general policy, but you have to deal with the problems on an individual basis. The other part about communication, I already spoke about this. We are the last. This is very recent. We want to be a part of the solution, and they sometimes want to present us as part of the problem. Would you like to say anything, Mr. Toribio? I agree completely with him, because the big property owners have been stigmatized. We are not the bad ones in this situation. We want to present part of the solution. We must get rid of this stigma. The last regulation of urban rental law makes a big difference between institutional and individual owners and has different conditions in the rental. We should all sit down at the same table and discuss this, and the property owners should be able to give their opinion, and we're only 4% of the stock of apartments, residential apartments. Now that we have Kurt Putzinger here, I would like to ask him 3 questions, which I think are very interesting from my point of view. First of all, I would like to know, I can ask you in English. Los partidos políticos de extrema derecha populistas, ¿cómo aceptan las políticas de vivienda subvencionada? ¿Están a favor o en contra de la política de vivienda subvencionada? ¿Están haciendo campaña en contra de este tipo de vivienda o están apoyando la vivienda subvencionada en Austria? La segunda pregunta es: ¿cuál es el umbral cuál es el proceso de selección de los inmigrantes de Viena para poder acceder a la vivienda subvencionada. ¿Todos los inmigrantes tienen derecho a acceder a este tipo de vivienda o tienen que cumplir determinadas condiciones? Y luego, un tema que aquí es muy candente es que hay personas que ocupan los pisos, no los pagan. ¿Cuántos desahucios tienen ustedes en su cartera de vivienda social para las personas que ocupan las casas, que no pagan el alquiler? Entonces, son tres preguntas. La posición de la extrema derecha, cuáles son las condiciones para los migrantes y el número de desahucios que tienen. Voy a olvidarme de la última, pero luego me las recordará las preguntas. Luego me recordará las preguntas porque me olvidaré de la última. En general, la vivienda subvencionada, hay un consenso muy amplio a favor de este tipo de vivienda en Austria. Los partidos de extrema derecha no les interesa la vivienda, solo les interesan los problemas, no les hablan de los nuevos apartamentos ni las renovaciones, pero si hay un problema en las calles, entonces harán una fotografía y enseñarán todo lo malo de la comunidad de Viena. Esa es su única relación con la vivienda social. A ellos solo les interesa ir en contra del extranjero. Si ves el tipo de fotografía que publican, bueno, sabes qué tipo de ideología hay detrás de ella. No tienen ningún papel no desempeñan ningún papel, no les interesa la vivienda social o subvencionada. Ellos utilizan la vivienda subvencionada, por supuesto, porque el 60% de sus clientes, de sus votantes, viven en este tipo de viviendas. La segunda pregunta tiene que ver con los migrantes. ¿Puedes solicitar un apartamento subvencionado después de haber sido residente durante 2 años de forma oficial en Viena? Esto es la misma norma tanto para los ciudadanos europeos como para los vieneses, por supuesto. Estos no tienen ningún límite. Realmente el límite de ingresos que puedes tener para solicitar un apartamento de este tipo es de 46.000 euros al año. La ciudad de Viena es propietaria de los apartamentos subvencionados y tienen que proporcionar este servicio. Una parte se pasan a una organización para su distribución y 2/3 están gestionados por las empresas, que el 90% de ellas son organizaciones sin ánimo de lucro con unos beneficios limitados de alrededor del 2% que necesitan para la gestión de este tipo de organizaciones, y esto está controlado. Por lo tanto, si ganan algo más de dinero que este 2%, tienen que reinvertirlo en vivienda subvencionada. Luego queremos saber sobre el número de desahucios. En general no sé cuáles son las cifras, solo sé de estas 220 apartamentos de propiedad comunitaria. La última cifra que recibí fue de 700 al año. Yo diría que el 80% de estos desahucios son de personas que no encajan en las normas y es un comportamiento repetido. No te van a echar si te fumas un cigarrillo en el balcón por primera vez, pero si se te pide 10 veces, y si haces, por ejemplo, ruido después de las 12 en repetidas ocasiones y no cambias a pesar de las protestas, te pueden echar. Son 700 desahucios entre 250.000 apartamentos. Esa es la proporción. Speakers, I wanted to end with Puttinger. We will change the order. Because what we're going to do, as we have 6 minutes left, I would like, maybe the audience would like to ask questions about any of the subjects that have been discussed in this panel. Does anybody have any questions? Yes, there are 2 hands up. First this woman and then that gentleman. I am from this side of the room. What's clear is that there's no common language. The collaboration model could be a starting point, but you can't really see an agreement. There's not a common language here. We see more a tennis match with a net in the middle rather than a collaboration or the feeling that there's a common language. More than a question is the conclusion this lady has reached. Well, if I can speak, I can say something about this. I would like to comment upon it. The main problem we have in Spain and in many countries is that housing is a topic that affects to the elections. If you collaborate with companies, that is not well seen by the voters, rather than if you do it on your own as the public sector. So in Spain, the housing has been a way of getting votes in elections. Scandinavian countries and some in the center of Europe, they interpreted this differently. They didn't get votes by giving you the ownership of the house. It's just giving you some wonderful apartments for rental in the center of the cities. If we go to Stockholm, Copenhagen, Oslo and many German cities, you will see that these rental houses are the property of the big cities, the big municipalities. We could have had this if we hadn't made a very important legal change, because in Spain the small banks did not have the capacity of investing, so they built houses and they put them out for rental. When these small banks wanted to become bigger banks, this accommodation was very small business, so they got rid of them, and what they did is intervene. Maybe some bank financial company, they bought shares of the main companies of the country that produce services. So in Germany, the small banks are owners of public housing, and here we have not been very interested in the social aspect. Why is the public sector not collaborating with the private sector? Because the private companies need to fulfill some profitability criteria. Public sector has a lot of bureaucracy, and the nature of the private sector is very different, so they speak different languages. Very briefly, well, we want PPPs. In the real estate bubble, Azora developed more than 4,000 social housing for rental. There is this possibility of collaboration. The problem is we are stigmatized. We are not evil. We are not the wolf. We are not a vulture fund. If we offer a solution, if in the collaboration we understand the interests of both sides, of course we will find a solution, and they will always find us there to help. You will allow me to say I have been working in the radio for a long time. I have to finish in 2 minutes 31 seconds. Can I speak for... Do I have 1 or 2 more minutes? Thank you, that's great. Mr. Villa wants to say something very briefly. Just to complement something that Gonzalo said, I understand the conclusion. We have been invited here to speak. I think that the other side is not represented either. We all know that the administration has tried to create an instrument of rental accommodation by means of a partnership. But in order to do this, we need a lot of bureaucracy. We have a project and we need more than 1,000 administrative approvals. If we all think of the speed of execution in the administration of the different steps, if we make a schedule, the calendars are impossible, so we need to improve this bureaucracy, of course. Good morning. My question is very simple. From the outside, I cannot see the possibility of the public-private partnership because of a problem of trust. My question is very simple. With such a hostile legislation towards the developers or the property owners, is it possible for a developer to invest 50 million with the Ministry of Housing when the rules of the game are changed very easily, or sometimes there was a 5% profitability yield guaranteed, and that changed? Is it possible in a country such as Spain with so many changes in the legislation, is it possible to have serious models of public-private collaboration in the long term? I would like to ask the question in general. I would like to answer. My proposal is not the ministry. I think it's too bureaucratic. The housing ministry has no competencies. It can only make assessments, and now is simply a general secretary. I'm talking about the municipalities, city councils who want to solve the housing problem in their metropolitan areas. We need very clear rules, that's all. When they speak about the professionalization of the rental residential market, the main challenge is for it to be profitable. And in this country, we shouldn't be scared of a developer to earn money. If they earn money and they fix a social problem, thank you very much to the fund and to the developer. But one of the problems we have is that we think that somebody who earns money has to be sorry for it. I think the regulations are very easy. My explanation to a mayor, when I explain this to a mayor, they always ask me to repeat it because they haven't understood it. Mr. Klaus, I think public-private partnerships are not only necessary, but if we don't do it, we will not solve the problem of housing, because we need more houses. The public sector does not have any money. Our public accounts are very low. We cannot increase our debt in order to fulfill our international commitments. We are at a level of 100% GDP in debt. We need money to build affordable rental accommodation, and the only place where we can find this money in order to have housing projects is in the private sector. So if we want to do something serious with relevant numbers in the sector of affordable housing. It will have to be a public-private partnership. Otherwise, nothing will be done. So this is very clear for me. How long will it last for this society to be mature enough in order to be able to establish PPPs that work? I have not got a crystal ball to find what the future will be, but with the present levels of lack of trust between the public and the private sector in the housing sector, this is going to take a lot of time. If one speaks about the other one systematically as a vulture fund, the other one speaks about the public sector as a useless, financial, ignorant and stupid public administrator. There is no trust in this between these two actors, so it will take us some time to find collaboration frameworks like the ones we find in other countries such as Austria and others countries where we have been able to create collaboration frameworks in the long term. It is not impossible because I think that in some aspects we have made this possible. For example, in the case of Barcelona, there's been a public-private collaboration, a very interesting PPP in quite an important project of 4,000 million square meters of land built. There was a collaboration with some established rules and for a project, a long-term project, and this has made possible the development in Poblenou. So we are ignorant, political illiterate. Are we incapable of public-private collaborations? No, we have managed to do this in many cases. We have managed this in 22 At and also in the Olympic Games. There have been many cases in which a public-private collaboration has been possible. Yes, that is in order to make business. Which case of public-private collaboration exists that is not in order to make business? Because in Austria these PPPs are not aimed at making business. I think that these PPPs are always based on the idea that the private sector will make business. Why haven't you not done this with public housing? If you have done this in the Olympic Villa and in the 22 At, why have you not done this in social housing? Because it wasn't important. Other things were more important. I believe that the politics of housing in Spain all depends on the has not been carried out because of the votes. I think I disagree with you. No, politicians are never looking for votes. Yes, of course, they're always looking for votes. But the only thing I'm saying is that neither the Socialist nor the Conservative Party have done anything in public housing. They have done very little. If you look at the public budget for housing in Spain, they are insignificant. Not carrying out any public social housing politics in Spain is actually doing housing politics. Why have we not done this? Because we have very good weather, because people are willing to buy housing, and from a political point of view they didn't need to build social housing. The social housing that was built in Spain was built during Franco's time. Franco did do a lot of social housing. Almost half of the development in Barcelona was done with social housing. The great projects of social housing were carried out by the dictatorship. And it wasn't done because of votes, interest in votes, because Franco was not interested in elections. Social housing is much more revolutionary than living rented. If you say that Franco did this better than you, it's quite polemic, controversial. I'm not. What you have said is that Franco was good at developing social housing, and the socialists and the conservatives did not. You say that this is done for votes, and I disagree. You're wrong with this. Don't be scared of admitting your mistakes. I'm not wrong. I have my opinion. I think that your opinion, the opinion of both of you, is sufficiently clear. I don't know if it's it's enough, but I think we need a therapy for couples therapy between you two. I would like to thank Mr. Kurt Puttinger for coming from Vienna. Thank you very much. It's been a pleasure to listen to you. And even though this model cannot be replicated in Barcelona because the situation of both cities is very different, we have heard a good example of good ideas and of good practice. Now each one of you will stay with their own conclusions, but there's been some really interesting ideas in this discussion which are food for thought. Direction in order to make progress. Thank you very much, David Villa, Gonzalo Bernardo, the director of the master degree in real estate development, Daniel Toribio, director of development of business in Anticipa, Mr. Puttinger, who's the main responsible for the housing unit of the City Council of Vienna, and Mr. Klaus, who's an ex-mayor of Habitat. Thank you very much to all of you. Enjoy the different presentations.